Hey, Scott. It's nice to have you on the podcast today.
It's good to be here, Kyla. I was just saying that Meta has decided that I need more Kyla in my life. You literally pop up in my feed, on my Reels feed, what feels like every other minute. So congrats on your social success.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah, I mean, hopefully, like I said, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but the algorithms are pretty tricky to master, as I know you know. But yeah, I want to talk about your new book, The Algebra of Wealth. Um, I got a pre-read and it was incredibly interesting. And you talked about all these really big
Thanks.
concepts. But one thing that you really focused on, obviously, was wealth. And you talked about how wealth equated to economic security. But you also had a
hmm
definition for wealth that I had never seen before. Could you walk through that equation and that definition that you put together?
So I the strategy. Well, I find the definition of wealth is passive income that's greater than your burn, just on a very basic level, and that means my father is wealthy. And I'll come back to the algorithm for how to get there, the equation. But I find the definition of wealth is my dad is wealthy because between his Royal Navy pension and Social Security, he gets about $48,000 a year, and he spends 38. My dad is the world's cheapest man. We went out for Mexican food. He's 93, and he orders the same thing and a margarita, and he has a few sips of his margarita, and he asks, no joke, for the margarita to go. So we take home a half drink margarita. Anyways, but he's rich. He's 93 and still saving money. And then I have friends who run large divisions of investment banks that make between $3 and $7 million a year, depending upon the year, and between their ex-wife, their alimony, their home in the Hamptons, their FlexJet card, their Master of the Universe lifestyle, they spend all of it. And I can tell you firsthand, they sit awake at night, a lot of nights, staring at the ceiling, really worried. So passive income that's greater than your burn. And that's kind of how you sort of figure out your retirement number. And we can go into that later. But I have found, generally speaking, the strategy for trying to get wealthy is the following. And I'd like to distill it down to an equation that people can hold on to. The first is focus, and that is finding your talent. People say follow your passion. I think a lot of young people mistake that for their hobby. You want to find something that you can be in the top 10% of everyone in that sector in an industry that has a 90+% employment rate. So if you're in the top percent of accounting or maintenance or plumbing or the legal field or the medical field or the majority of fields have 90+% employment rate, you are going to make really good money. And so the key is, how do I find something, invest the requisite 10,000 hours of grit, investment, certification, breaking through hard things, enduring the bullshit that's endemic to any industry or company, and try and become a master, like mastery, focus, mastery through focus. And be careful, acting. 87% of people in SAG-AFTRA, who are the most talented actors in the world, 87% of them don't qualify for health insurance because they make less than $23,000 a year. You want to open a restaurant, a fashion brand, be a model, be in sports. I wanted to make my living in sports, and then I recognized at UCLA I didn't have the talent, and then the people I talked to who were on the floor working in sports, I found make no money, and it's a very difficult industry. So, I think finding that thing, workshopping in your 20s and finding something that you're good at, your talent, and think, could I be in the top 10% in an industry that has a 90+% employment rate? And then the other stuff is more basic, it's more financial. It's one, I call it stoicism, but it's really developing a savings muscle. And that is recognizing that no one's as impressed with your shit as you are. And that you are competing against algorithms and psychologically tested digital platforms and offers that are just genius at convincing you that at this moment you should upgrade from economy to economy plus. And then if you're in economy plus, it's only another $50 to get economy comfort. And why not splurge? And only for an extra $200 you can upgrade to business class. There's just every day you are bombarded with really talented offers or really compelling offers that will convince you that, oh, you should order. Why not add this flourless chocolate cake to your French onion soup that you're ordering from Baltazar? I mean, every day, the additional add-ons for checkout in the cart. We live in a consumer society, and there's just so many amazing ways to spend money. So trying to figure out a way, wealth is about not how much you make, it's about how much you save. It's about figuring out a way to spend less than you make in an environment where it's just incredibly challenging to do that, especially in your 20s when you're peacocking and trying to, have some fun, enjoy your youth, demonstrate your attractiveness as a potential mate. So it is incredibly hard. I just want to acknowledge that. And living, finding different types of rewards, realizing that very few people look at your stuff and evaluate you based on that, and trying to find reward in other things, and then gamify it with a partner or someone else to try and save money. I talk about when I was in college, in my fraternity, it was mostly wealthy kids in the Valley, but there was 5 or 6 of us, and everyone who we were, that we didn't have any money. And we always owed the fraternity money. Our house bills would pile up. And so every summer I had to save $3,300 or I wasn't re-enrolling at UCLA. And me and these 5 other guys in the fraternity would gamify it. And every day we'd do a whiteboard and write down how much money we spent. And we'd gamify trying to spend as little as possible. And I spent $77 a week for an entire summer, including rent. I lived on top ramen, bananas, and milk. And it was still kind of fun. And you can do this when you're young because beer and friends makes for a pretty good time. You can have a lot of fun pretty inexpensively when you're young. But develop a savings muscle. I'm not suggesting you need to save a ton of money because I think you want to enjoy yourself when you're young and splurge and go to Coachella or Tulum or whatever it is. But I do think you want to figure out a way to gamify it and really develop a budgeting and savings muscle. The next is diversification. I didn't learn this until I was older. I always went all in on one thing, usually my own business. And even when I had opportunities to take money off the table and diversify, I didn't do it. And that was near disastrous for me a couple times. I was always way overinvested in tech or my own companies. And so when the dot-bomb implosion happened in 2000, I lost everything. And then it happened to me again in 2008 after clawing my way back for a better part of a decade. So any one stock has like a 50.1% chance of going up in any given day. Any 5 stocks in the S&P, if you picked and held onto them for 10 years, no one has ever lost money. So the number one question I get via email outside of advice to young men is it too late to buy NVIDIA stock? That's the email I keep getting right now. And the answer is I don't know, but I would suggest, okay, so how do you turn I don't know into a strategy? If you buy a low-cost index fund, 33% on every dollar that goes into that index fund will go into the Magnificent Seven because they now represent 33% of the value of the S&P, and these funds are indexed. So if they continue to trade at crazy irrational prices and go up, and they might, they're incredible companies, you get to participate. But at the same time, if their valuations are a little heady and they come down and the other 493 S&P 500 companies finally get their day in the sun, you have the bulk of your capital in that. So diversification is essentially your Kevlar from taking a bullet to the chest and not having it be fatal. The companies I have been most confident in, the investments I have been most sure that would do well, oftentimes go to zero. And then other investments that I thought were good investments, good management, but I really didn't know. I've had some investments go up 25-fold. That's not an exaggeration. And here's the thing, nobody knows. And so you don't want to be a hero, or you don't need to be a hero and find the needle in the haystack, just buy the whole haystack. And when you're young, you're very greedy. You can't imagine just making 11% a year, but making 11% a year means that in 21 years, your investment goes up 8-fold. And that goes to the final thing, and that is trying to recognize a flaw in our species. And that is, for 99% of our existence on the planet, we haven't lived past the age of 35. So people your age have no ability to calibrate time. And that is, Kyla, the next 20 years are going to go like a blink for you. You just can't even imagine. You can't process it. So if you can understand that and recognize that and appreciate it, it results in you maybe trying to invest a little bit of more money early and then leave it alone and not trade and not let fees eat up your returns. And if you can recognize how fast time will go, that's an enormous advantage for a young person, because my closest friend when I was just out of college was a guy named Lee Lotus. And I remember Lee saying to me one day, I need to find $2,000 to put into my IRA Roth or something like that. And I said, if me investing $2,000 right now means anything when I'm older, shoot me. Because I always thought I'm going to be a baller. I'll sell companies. I'll make great investments. Lee has probably on average made a fifth to a tenth of what I make every year. He is exceptionally wealthy because from a young age, he recognized me and Scott are going to be hanging out together when we're in our 50s, and it's going to go really fast. And if I just make a consistent number of investments very early and let time take over, compound interest is just gonna get me over the goal line. So focus, find your talent, times diversification, times savings muscle through living a little bit more like a stoic, and then appreciating how fast time is going to go.
Yeah. And I want to touch on a couple of those points, and all of them are incredible. But I think there's two ideas that sort of tie into one another, the retirement and then economic security. So for the younger generation, they're facing a housing crisis. They're facing a labor market that does have a lot of opportunities, but there's rolling recessions in tech and finance. So we have this current macro environment that has never been better, but there's still these pockets of pain. And a lot of people feel like they're never going to be able to retire. And so considering that current economic environment, how can people still make it out on top at the end?
I'm not here with a message of hope. I want this to be a Hallmark commercial, but something I'm very concerned about is that I see every economic policy as basically a transfer of wealth from people your age to my age. Houses cost $290,000 pre-pandemic. Just 4 years later, they're $420,000, and interest rates have gone from 3% to 7%. So we have this really depressing trend. I just got off the phone with the guys who run Live Nation. I'm like, a lot of your success is not your fault, because a lot of people your age have literally given up saving for a house. And so now they're spending money on going to see Taylor Swift in Bangkok because they're like, a house is just out of our reach now. They're not mating. They're not having kids because they can't afford it. 60% of people 30 to 34 in 1990 had at least one child. Now it's 27%. It's not because they don't want kids, it's because they can't afford them. Look at the two biggest tax deductions, mortgage interest and capital gains. Who owns homes and stocks? People my age. Who rents and makes their money working all day? People your age. We strip out the child tax credit, which makes it more expensive for people to have kids. But be sure we had a 9% cost of living adjustment for Social Security recipients. So we have essentially, the people who make our laws are a cross between The Walking Dead and Golden Girls. They're in their 80s. Literally, the Speaker of the House, the minority leader, the two people running for president, they had kids in the 60s. So do they really relate to people your age and the challenges you face economically or in terms of technology and some of the issues you face? They have no fucking idea. And quite frankly, they think, everybody knows someone who's at Google and has made a ton of money. And just what William Gibson said about the future is true of wealth and prosperity in the United States. And that is, it's here, it's just not evenly distributed. So the metaphor of 7 companies, the S&P was up 23% last year. Oh my God, amazing. It was 7 companies did 60% of it. And that's a metaphor for the larger economy. So if you come out from a great school, get into a great information age economy, get options, you can make $1 million by the time you're 30. That wasn't possible when I was getting out of school. But at the same time, 2/3 of kids who are good kids, who play by the rules, who work hard, don't get into a good school because me and my colleagues have embraced this rejectionist bullshit positioning where we take pride in turning away 90% of our applicants, which in my view is tantamount to a homeless shelter taking pride in turning 90% of the people who showed up last night. We purposely weaponize housing permits. And once you own a house, you decide that you're concerned about traffic. And every year we have a deficit of 1.5 million building permits relative to household formation. And we have big monopolies who weaponize government to ensure that it's harder for small companies to ever get out of the crib. So there's a lack of employment, high-paid employment opportunities. So what you have is this culture where some people are killing it and the rest aren't. America used to be about the bottom 90%. You know who doesn't need college and doesn't need government help? The top 10%. They don't need it. They've got rich parents, or they're doing well, or so they're so talented. Who needs help is the bottom 90. And this is something I'm passionate about. I got into UCLA when it had a 76% admissions rate. This year it'll be 9%. It cost me $7,000 in total tuition for all 7 years. And by the way, I graduated from UCLA with a 2.27 GPA. And what happened? Berkeley let me into graduate school. Can you imagine Berkeley letting anyone into graduate school now with a 2.27 GPA? I mean, we've essentially sequestered economic opportunity, education, and housing from young people. And what do you know? They're the most anxious, depressed young generation in history. So that's the bad news. The good news is we can fix it. The incumbents, wealthy, and the top 1% will all pretend that it's network issues and globalization. That is just such bullshit. My taxes are way too goddamn low, and your taxes are way too high. And if a university doesn't grow its freshman seats faster than population growth, it is no longer a nonprofit. It's a hedge fund sitting on top of classes for rich donors, and it should lose its nonprofit status. We should break companies up so there's more people bidding for your talent. We should make a federal law that any county can be sued if it doesn't issue housing permits that are being applied for faster than population growth. We need to massively cram a shit ton of capital, which we have, into the pockets of younger people. Otherwise, they're not going to have kids. Otherwise, they're going to be very depressed because every fucking day they see thousands of images of all the shit they don't have and all the success they're not reaping, because there will be someone who will be a millionaire among your friend group. And he or she will take to Instagram and then vomit up their inventory of all the shit they have, such that you feel worse about yourself. So we have the worst of all worlds. We have total income inequality, and then we have social media platforms that rub it in your face. I think this is the biggest issue. The one piece of data that we have to fix in our society is that for the first time, a 30-year-old isn't doing as well as his or her parents were at 30, doing at 30. That's never happened in our country's history. You look like you're 20s headed to 30. You're not going to be doing well as your parents at 30. That's never happened. That's never happened. And it creates rage and it creates shame. It's been especially hard on young men because young women are killing it. Young women are going to college. They mature earlier. They have stronger social networks. More single women in America have homes now than single men. And men are you have never seen a group in America fall further faster than young men. And if our kids aren't doing well, if young Americans aren't doing well, then what is the point of any of this shit? Right? So the bad news is we have, I think, the biggest problem in the West. If our young people aren't doing as well as their parents, then what's the point of any of this? That's the entire point of an economy, is that young people do well. The good news is we've got the hard part figured out. And that is where you think about prosperity, housing, homelessness, depression, anxiety. These issues have been addressed in one or more of any number of markets. There aren't very many homeless people in New Zealand. The number of young people depressed is really low in Israel because they have national service and they have programs to take care of this. We can figure that shit out. The hard part is figuring out a way to bring together the alchemy of innovation, intellectual property, capital that creates the GDP of Denmark in an earnings call 5 minutes after the earnings call. NVIDIA added $240 billion in 5 minutes post its earnings call. That's hard. So we've got the hard stuff figured out. We can figure out how to make the pie much bigger. We're just really shitty at slicing it up and figuring out where it needs to go. So I'm hopeful, but I am really sick of incumbents my age electing people who throw up their arms and pretend these problems are not fixable. And if only young men took more accountability, and young people, I have a niece at Google. She's doing really well. Get a job at Goldman Sachs. Okay. Thanks, Nana. Thanks, Pop. It's just, anyway, there's a word salad. This is something I'm very passionate about. But I think the intergenerational theft and absolute cramming of the prosperity into the hands of seniors, people under the age of 40 on average are 24% less wealthy than they were 40 years ago. People over the age of 75 are 72% wealthier. So that's like an economy that's not working. That's an economy that's been weaponized by rich people. So I think we can address this issue, but it is the fundamental glitch in the system. It is the flaw. It is the immoral, corrupt part of our society right now, is that we come up with excuses to continue to transfer wealth from the young to the old.
Mm-hmm. And it really does.
Rant.
No, it's very good. Very impressive ranting abilities. But I don't think it was a rant, because I think it is really frustrating. Like, you're right, I'm in my 20s. I'll be 30 in 4 years. So I'm kind of experiencing all of this with my friends right now. Like, there's structural affordability problems that I talk about in my content. Like never being able to own a home. And there's also this concept of hoarding wealth with the older generations, right? And that's where the taxation idea comes into play. But then people will point to the phones and be like, well, the social media is killing the kids and it's all social media's fault. And you mentioned that anxiety and depression are on the rise. And oftentimes fixing some of that does come down to building more homes, but it does come down to building community. And you called wealth in your book a whole person object, right? So like more than just yourself. Can you talk about the value of building community? So some of this more woo-woo stuff that we're dealing with alongside of these policy issues that we're facing.
Yeah. So first off, the book is not a Susie Orman book about how you get out of debt and cut up your credit cards. This is about, okay, I'm good. I have some reasonable amount of education. I can make money. I'm emotionally and mentally stable to strong, and I have good, decent prospects. But what's the difference between just getting by and establishing real wealth? And you've probably seen those studies that if you have 5 friends, like your kids, I'm raising 2 boys, their peer group is more important than me right now. And there's all these studies showing that when 5 people hang out, you are the sum and then the average of your 4 closest friends. You end up the same weight. You end up the same, supporting the same political candidates. You go to the same restaurants, you eat the same foods, you end up living in the same area, you end up with the same approximate income level. Where things become much more variant is these 5 individuals in your peer group, many of whom made the same amount of money. 1 will end up economically very secure, wealthy. 3 will do just okay, and 1 will end up in real economic trouble. And the question is, well, how does that happen when they're all making the same kind of a similar amount of money? And that's what the book's about. What are the behaviors and strategies for being the person who develops economic security, despite the fact you did make a lot more money than your peers? And that's where the variance really sets in, and where you really need to think about thoughtful strategies and a little bit of effort early in your life to get there. And what I found is the difference between being wealthy and super wealthy was the following. There's a myth fomented by populist arguments on the left, usually, that Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, Senator Warren, will say a billionaire should not exist. That by virtue of the fact you're a billionaire, it meant you crawled over people. What I have found is that on average, really, really wealthy people are better people. They're higher character. They're more philanthropic. They invest more in the relationships. They go out of their way to help other people. They live up to their word. They work hard. They're patriotic. They're disciplined. Because real extreme wealth is in the agency of others. And that is, to get really wealthy, you have to build an army of allies along the way. You have to be the person that is invisibly in a room of opportunities because there's other people that want you to win in that room. You are seen as the person that talks really well of people behind their back, and they want to help you. And this kind of Monty Burns, and unfortunately a lot of the most famous figures, because they dominate the press because the algorithms like asshole behavior, appear to be these billionaires that aren't very nice people. And the reality is the majority of really wealthy people are really good people. And so what I call it a whole person project, your character is in many ways your weapon for establishing economic security. Because just looking at a relationship level, the 2 ways to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory from an economic security standpoint are 1, divorce. I'm divorced. I lost 60% of my wealth overnight. Half of it went to my ex, and I lost another 10% because now we were each supporting 2 households. So each of us lost 60% of our wealth overnight. I don't care how wealthy you are. When you take a 60% hit overnight, it's disastrous. And then the other thing is a lot of very talented people get divorces from their business partners. They start a firm, it's doing well. One doesn't appreciate the other, one, whatever it might be, and they get into an argument and a divorce, and they tear apart a successful company because they're not getting along. So if you don't bring a certain amount of forgiveness, generosity, and for lack of a better term, love to your personal and professional relationships, you're never going to be really wealthy. It's the best way to blow up economic security is not being a generous, forgiving person. So wealth is, going back to your original statement, it's a whole person project.
Yeah. And I want to talk too about, when we think about community and like building trust and going outside beyond yourself and having that good character, it does boil down to trust, right? And like, so my thesis is that trust is the most valuable commodity in the world right now, because when you go on social media, as you said, like the worst people in the world are being elevated. So how do you think about reestablishing trust? Anxiety and depression makes it hard for people to want to invest in their future, to trust in the fact that they do have a future. So how would you address those points?
How to establish trust among other people, or to trust that they have a good future ahead of them?
I suppose both. Yeah. They're kind of one and the same, right?
Well, look, I struggle with this, but a basic rule: never say anything bad about anybody. I mean, I know that sounds weird, but the moment you say something bad about someone, everyone makes a mental note to themselves: what are they saying about me? Always take the opportunity to talk people up. Try to be honest, try to be measured. I was none of those things when I was your age. I was always trying to make bold, provocative statements. And I think that men especially think that if they sometimes diminish other men, that it's a zero-sum game, that they get more. And that on the other, if they compliment somebody or acknowledge someone else's strength, or that somehow it reduces their worth. I think women are better at this. I just think women are so much more fluid with compliments of each other than men. Women will come up and say, "Wow, you look great tonight." Like, guys don't say that to each other. They just don't say that. They somehow perceive themselves as being weaker. So I think expressing positive emotions, trying to really reduce the amount of shit you talk about others. Just don't take a chance to talk people up. They appreciate it. Word gets back to them when you're talking them up. And then the fastest way, what do you want? You want to be liked, right? They did a study on high school kids. The kids that are most popular aren't the best looking, aren't the best academically, aren't the best athletes. They're the kids that have the confidence to every day demonstrate they like other people. They're the kids that are really nice, or walk up to people and say, "Hey, can we be friends?" Or, "You're so good at this," or, "You did great in the game," or, "Can you help me with my homework? You're so goddamn smart," or, "I love what you're." The kids, the easiest way to get someone to like you and be your ally is to like them, is to show genuine regard and admiration and concern for them. And think about it. When someone likes you, you kind of immediately like them back. Now, there's some insecurities in young and mating. When people like you too much, you're not interested in them, because we have this hierarchy where we want to mate outside our weight class. But for the most part, the fastest way to build character and trust is just to be a thoughtful, nice person, and try and be really promiscuous with your positive emotions. Force yourself, when you think something positive about someone, to articulate it. I made the mistake of thinking that if I was impressed or liked somebody or thought well of them, that they were telepathic and they would pick up on it, even in my closest relationships. And what you realize as you get older is the biggest wasted resource in the world is positive thoughts, because 98% of them you don't articulate. And now I try to, if I see a friend doing something interesting in social or whatever, I try and just text them. I'm like, "You were great. This was great. Well done." Or, whatever it might be. I saw a guy in the gym the other day, and I went up to him and I'm like, "Jesus Christ, I wish I had." I'm like, the guy was, doing these pull-ups. I'm like, "I wish I could do that." I could just see he was this young kid, and he just lit up, right? Anyway, I think talking well of people, trying to really reduce the shit posting, take the temperature down online. Don't be that person that's always feels a need to respond to every slight. I'm not suggesting you let people walk all over you, but recognize, again, it goes back to the Stoics. You can't try and learn from any criticism, but you don't need to get back in their face. I used to think everything was a zero. I used to be that guy that if someone honked at me, I'd speed up and honk back at them. And it was like, okay, I don't know what's going on with this person. I don't know if their kid found out their kid has diabetes, or they just got laid off. It's like, it's okay to absorb some body blows every once in a while. So I think generally speaking, these are very basics that's taught in Sunday school, or that but you don't practice. And then I think showing a certain amount of discipline, being the person that's got a plan, you may not stick to your plan. You got to have a plan. I coach a lot of young men. I'm like, you got to be physically strong, right? You got to have a plan. And it might be going back to school to get a scuba certification so you can teach scuba. It might be getting a class 3 driver's license. It might be learning how to install energy efficient HVAC, whatever it might be. You have to have a plan and be able to articulate it. And also just be the person that shows some discipline. Like, you don't want to be the last person to go home during the work week. You want to be the person that says, no, I'm shifting to water when you're drinking. I mean, there's a time to go hard. I like to drink, and I've more than my share of alcohol and drugs, but be that guy or that gal in your 20s. It's like, I love that statement. It's all about what you do during the day. The people who are most impressive at night are the ones that just have shit going on during the day. Anyways, this is a lot, but I would say building trust is a function of being measured, talking people up, living up to your commitments, being measured. When you say you're going to do something, try and do that. When you can't, being honest and saying, I don't know if I can do that. Being honest with people, but never, try not to be mean unless you're protecting their feelings. And then how do you trust about the future? Look, I do think America, I'm worried that we're raising a generation of young people that don't like America because of social media and because of some of the income inequality. I think every day, and I think these platforms are being manipulated by adversaries, and I know that sounds paranoid, but it doesn't mean I'm wrong. And I worry we're raising a generation of civic, nonprofit, and business leaders that just don't like America, despite the fact that on the whole, despite our problems, we're still probably the least bad place in the world, maybe even the best. So I think we have a lot of work to do in terms of giving people more hope. And the mental health crisis you referenced is just staggering, and starts at a young age. My colleague at NYU, Jonathan Haidt, has this seminal book out right now that is like, he's arguably the most influential scholar in the world right now. But, there's a lot of stuff we can do at a younger age around phones, and it's kind of up to parents and schools. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's a lot of problems to work on, but I believe too, all the problems have solutions like you've outlined here. It's not, the answer is not to give up, right? And so in the book, The Algebra of Wealth, you do give people all these tools. So where can people find your book? How can they go and purchase it?
There's this book site called Amazon. I can get it anywhere. If they type in my name in Algebra of Wealth, they're going to get a chance to pre-order it. And if you post a receipt of the book, I'll donate $50 to Charity Water, which is this wonderful charity bringing potable water to sub-Saharan Africa, started by a guy named Scott Harrison, who I've known for about 20 years.
Yeah.
So pre-order it now. If you like it, please write an Amazon review. If you hate it, please order another one and send it to an enemy.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Scott.
You're very welcome. Thanks for your time, Kyla, and congratulations on your success.
Thank you.